we aren't seeing an increase in domestic violence, in the number of perpetrators. What we're seeing is increased opportunity.
If your old woman's giving you a little bit of mouth, you spring up. That should do the trick.
Good morning and welcome to Karen Ingala Smith. Could you please introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your organisation, please?
Morning, I'm Karen Ingala Smith. I'm Chief Executive of an organisation called Naya. We are based in London and we support women who've been subjected to sexual and domestic violence and abuse, including prostitution.
And how long has that organisation been established, and can you sort of briefly outline how you sort of founded the organisation in the first place?
I didn't find the organisation. I've been there 10 years, but the organisation's been going about 45 years now. It started off as Hackney Women's Aid, set up by local survivors and activists who wanted to support women who were experiencing domestic violence back in the 1970s, when a lot of women's organisation or women's groups were setting up refuge groups and then later rape crisis groups.
And can you explain the project Counting Dead Women and what is the significance of that? A little bit of an outline about sort of why it was started.
Yeah, sure. So I started Counting Dead Women in January 2012. A young woman who'd been referred to Naya was killed by her boyfriend on the 2nd of January. And I wanted to find out what had happened to her, because at that point we'd only just been told about her death, not anything else. And of course it was very upsetting. So I went onto the internet to try and find out some information. But what I found was report after report of women who'd been killed by men at the beginning of the year or since Christmas. And I just started to try and, well, I wanted to work out how many women it had been when it was only the second day of the year. So I started making a list of their names so that I could count. And then I think some police officer described one of the killings as an isolated incident, and that made me really angry. How could something that's happened so many times be an isolated incident? Surely there are relationships with between all the different killings of women. I just carried on keeping a list of the names, really. I was disturbed by the paucity of official data. So you could find out how many women had been killed in the context of intimate partner violence, or even how many women had been killed in wider domestic violence. But there was no official data on how many women are killed by men, and I think that's an important question to ask. And I also think it's quite easy to just say statistics, and I don't think that's respectful to women at all. I think they deserve to be remembered as full individuals, and I don't think it should be easy to talk about. I think it should be upsetting, and I think by recording the names of women and understanding a little bit about their lives, we have a much better picture of what men's fatal violence against women actually does in this country. And obviously that was 8 years ago now, and I've carried on doing it because I just don't think there's enough done on an official level to raise awareness and have a proper, I suppose, the proper data that we need to analyse this problem And then from that, we've moved on to a project called the Femicide Census, which is you could say a more robust version of counting dead women. With the Femicide Census, once a year we do freedom of information requests to all the police forces in the country and ask them to share information of women killed by men in their police force area, so that we get actually much more accurate records. Because counting dead women, I just do through the media. Actually, it turns out that I do manage to find most cases through counting dead women, but maybe every year there are 5 or 10 that I've missed through low levels of media interest, I suppose.
It does seem quite astonishing that in 2020 that there is no official system for recording this. And you mentioned the fact that you originally started aggregating the data through newspaper articles, through what was in the press.
Through the media, yeah.
Through the media, yeah.
Social media, really.
So how is it possible that there is no sort of like government office that is actually collecting this data? Why is it left to an individual organization of women to sort of self-fund and self-organize this, rather than it being an official statistic by, say, the Office of National Statistics or the police? Why is that not happening?
I just think it's not seen as important. It's acceptable, it's normal. So we've seen, I mean, you can see, I suppose, 2 examples. You see deaths by terrorism and the mass state response to those sort of deaths, or perhaps more similar, youth knife crime. And again, you get we've had a very quick state response to those crimes, and aggregated data, whereas men's violence against women just doesn't seem to warrant that. I mean, I could give you the feminist answer and just say patriarchy, women aren't important, men's violence, so yeah, that's what I'd say, really.
And what kind of level of statistics are we sort of talking here? Because we're sort of quite familiar with sort of domestic violence statistics, but in terms of the actual numbers of women being killed every year by their intimate male partners, what are we looking at in terms of the scope?
It's about it varies year by year between about 60% and 75% of all women killed by men. On average, over the 10 years that we've been of data that we've looked at for the Femicide Census, it's roughly on average a woman every 4 days killed by a partner or ex-partner.
And that obviously has huge implications for what we're currently going through in the United Kingdom, and also all across the world with the lockdown. This has been mentioned by several organisations, that the sort of domestic pressure of having family all in the same building, with stress about finances, everything else, that they're actually expecting a spike in the rise of domestic violence incidents. Can you explain a little bit about how you understand that to be exacerbated by the current situation?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd say. Firstly, there are exactly the same number of abusive men in the world as there was a month ago. So we aren't seeing an increase in domestic violence in the number of perpetrators. What we're seeing is increased opportunity. So people are and increased opportunities, I suppose, increased connection, isolation, and decreased opportunities for women to get out and or get help. So yes, the pressures are there, but I think they're excuses. Somebody who isn't violent won't become violent because of isolation.
What do you think are the mechanisms when, particularly when there is this sort of isolation, for women who are in that situation to actually reach out and get help? What are the avenues that are available to women who want to, or who are sort of experiencing domestic violence in this particular situation today?
Most specialist women's organisations are continuing and can be contacted. Obviously the police are still there, the emergency services are still there, statutory services should be running running their services too. So if women can reach out, we urge them to reach out. One of the problems that we're most aware of is, again, because of isolation, that women may not have the privacy to make a private phone call or use the internet. We know that perpetrators have started using tracking devices more and more to maybe spying on women's activities online or yeah, on their phones. So that's that's a problem. So the usual services are there. Some of them are running reduced services, but they are there. So we urge women to reach out and if they possibly can.
Are there any warning signs or flags that people who can be keeping an eye out on friends who are perhaps not coming forward? Are there any things to look for in terms of people sort of suddenly withdrawing from social media, those kind of things that might not be obvious to people who are not looking for them?
If you put messages out there, then men very quickly learn about them, and so
yeah. I'd like to thank Karen for speaking to us this morning. It's been incredibly informative. And just back to Karen, if you can let us know the best place to get more information on the census. Thank you very much.
www.femicidecensus.org.
Thank you very much, Karen.